Storytelling. Fantastic, isn't it? We all think we can do it. Few of us can effectively, but it's always required. No one knows really how we start it effectively and how we should approach it effectively, but regardless of whether we're using technology or not, storytelling is where we should all start with museum, visitor attractions or whatever it is you're doing. How do we start? Tips for doing it well, and where do we go from there?
Well, as you've already said, we definitely start with the story, and the story is the overriding, or should be the overriding driver. I mean, obviously in a theme park attraction, the experiential side comes into it too, so you're looking for that marriage between story and experience. In a museum, the stories that you're telling tend to be true stories, and in a attraction, the stories tend to be not so true stories. But yes, you're very much looking at the type of story, whether it's about historic fact, one very small, narrow subject or topic. That can then influence what way the story has to be told, whether media can play a role in that or not. And if it's a big story, a very big experiential story, and if it's a museum and there's the money there to bring in reenactors and make it sort of a cinematic spectacular, then obviously you go off in a different direction. But I think that it's important to remember that you can tell a story in a completely blacked out room and with some very simple props, ringing bell or a flashing light or whatever, and make the imagination work. And I think there are some attractions that play on that very well. The London Dungeon does that quite well. I mean, obviously they're out to spook you in that case. The War of the Worlds experience in London also uses that trick. There's a live actor in the room telling a story with minimal props, but your imagination is just running overtime. But that's just one part of the experience, which then expands, and that uses all aspects of technology. That's using, projection. It's using VR. So to develop a fully immersive experience.
How much pressure is there on the process of storytelling? If someone says, "Well, actually, we've got less of a budget than we thought we had. Perhaps we need to alter things and include fewer elements," or suddenly we can do more with this, or the story has changed a bit, we'll have to adapt it, and therefore you're halfway down the process of creation when you have to be flexible enough to adapt things and go on to something else.
I mean, in an ideal world, we get invited in at the beginning of a project, people like me that can help make the sort of decision, help designers. I would like to describe ourselves as creative engineers rather than just ones and zeros engineers. And you start sort of listening to the story, or you've even been given visuals and ideas of what the story is. And hopefully at that stage, no one's saying, "Oh, we see a great big projection screen," or "We see it as a ride," or whatever. They're telling you what it will be. Then the ideas develop and they think, well, actually we're thinking maybe this is a ride, or we're maybe thinking this is a flying theatre, or we may be thinking this is just a sit-down immersive theatre. So you start having those conversations, and certainly where budget's a major factor, which is typically in a museum project, then you have to start asking questions about the media production, what the media is, what they can actually physically bring, and whether they can create credible media. Because I mean, nowadays with projectors getting better, brighter, I mean, I'm zeroing in on projection because that is one of the obviously major platforms, but they're getting bigger, brighter, higher resolution. They show the chinks in the armour, so if the media is not good and you're blowing it up on a screen that's 4-6 metres wide, you're going to see it. So you want to know and understand all the different elements that can be brought into it to then help say, right, okay, we can use projection, or no, we shouldn't use projection. You're looking at the audio, you're looking at the lighting too, because I mean, if you're making an experience completely immersive, it's not just about the projection. Quite often it's the scenic environment, or that there's other sort of immersive factors, and lighting plays a major role in that too. And I think there's a lot of these immersive experiences nowadays have got a much better integration between audio, visual and lighting. The controller's got a lot better, and it's got a lot easier to bring them together. And program it as part of a coherent show.
I mean, lighting is quite often forgotten or ignored, isn't it?
It is.
As indeed audio.
Yeah.
You're looking at a Eurovision Song Contest, and the first thing that strikes you is the lighting.
Yeah.
And it's something that the audiovisual industry doesn't really feature or write about. We want to write more of it. It's a question of placing it in context with everything else. And as for audio, well, we know all about audio and how late we've all been to realising the potential of audio, when we know how incredibly influential and how it affects everything we do in a powerful way. Yeah, we may not be able to see anything, but when it's in its purest form, it's at its most powerful. And yet I can't believe that's been ignored for so many years and not appreciated for what it is.
Well, I think one of the problems with lighting pre-LED was the fact that if you wanted to have a red saturation scene, an amber saturation scene or whatever, that was one fixture with one gel over it to deliver that. So that was actually, it was only in the sort of really big theatrical shows that you could afford to do it, because it literally was a theatrical rig. But now that you've got very good RGB and W fixtures and get some a really good range of colour, your lighting rig now is a lot smaller, it's a lot cheaper, it uses a lot less power to run, so it's ticking far more boxes than conventional lighting fixtures were. And so therefore you can develop the scenes and enhance the experience more. On the sound aspect, a lot more attention at last has been given to the acoustic performance of the space that you're in. Again, that used to be the sort of areas of just major theatres, but now even in small attractions, small theatres, modelling is easy, it's cheap. You can model a space and you can test the reverberation in that space, and you can say, right, we've got a problem here, long before the buildings even exists in most cases. So then you can ensure that the sound, you can model the sound system in that space and make sure it sounds right, feels right. And it really is helping us to produce much higher quality attractions for a fraction of the price that we were doing even 10 years ago.
How are we doing with the skills, ability to get on top of these myriad of technologies and have the creative ability to use them effectively, and just keeping on top of these technologies and what they can do is a full-time job?
I'm going to have to try and stay off my soapbox now. Yeah, I do get disappointed with the skills sets sometimes, and I think, I mean, my son would be laughing because he always says, oh, you still like playing with those things called oscilloscopes and analog and all the rest of it. But I think people of my generation that have come through a wide spectrum of electronics and technology, because yes, you've had to change your mindset each time a new generational technology comes along, but you know the history that's behind it. And it helps you make more informed decisions, and I believe, and I would say that at my age, that we make a better decision because we understand what's effectively under the bonnet. And I do get disappointed when the sort of younger generation of engineers just say, well, yeah, okay, it's a digital box, it does this, it does that. They have no interest in what went before it, and they just literally take sometimes what's in front of them too much at face value, and then they make mistakes because they don't understand what's actually inside that box. Because, I mean, in my day, when I first started, we'd have a full rack of equipment, which is now can be inside one PC, but because you've had those individual boxes, and if you go into, say, the software that controls whatever it is that you're running, whether it's a DSP, video processing, whatever it is, in my history, I've gone through those as individual boxes, so I know what they're doing. And because you don't necessarily need to go into them with the software, you can go from A to B in default mode and it still works. People tend to leave the in-between bits alone because they don't understand it, but there are cases where they need to go and play with those in-between bits. So yes, I think that there needs to be better training within our industry, and also some respect to the technologies of the past to understand why we have the technologies of the current and future technology.